Very good. Okay, guys. So thank you very much for joining us here at Sunset Learning for our Cisco Firepower IPS Intrusion Prevention System Tech Talk. If you guys have not been through one of these Tech Talks before, let me just briefly reiterate what we're doing here. So what we're wanting to do is give you guys an introduction into the Cisco Firepower Intrusion Prevention System. I'm going to be mainly focusing on what exactly is the firepower device, right? So there's two pieces to it. There's an ASA routing and firewalling sort of piece to the device. But then there's also our intrusion prevention system, which is the SNORT IPS, or the SNORT Intrusion Prevention System itself. So with that being said, again, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us this morning. First thing I want to do is let's go over a quick agenda, and let me move this out of our way here. There we go. So I think you'll be excited to learn that we're going to first start talking about examining the difference between firewall technology and IPS technologies. So I'm going to first start, talking about what stateful and stateless firewalling actually is. What are some of the technologies that we utilize, like, for instance, NAT, right? Then I'm going to get into the intrusion prevention system, the technology itself, the SNORT IPS. This isn't where I do a deep dive. I'm actually going to be doing that a little bit later. But then, again, we want to talk about what is the difference between our standard firewalls and a next-gen firewall and a next-gen intrusion prevention system. So I am going to talk about some of the features, like the ability to defragment frames in line, which is very, very cool, or be able to sniff encrypted SSL encrypted traffic. Very, very cool stuff there. Now, once we talk about what the technology offers for us, then what we want to do is show you how to just basically, first of all, get in. So I want to show you the threat defense features. So what do the devices look like? Where can we actually install them? Then what is the FMC, the Firepower Management Center? And I always say console. I'm sorry, I'm probably going to say that about 1,000 times in this 1 hour. But yeah, what's the FMC basics? So how do we get inside of the management console itself? And then also, what does the GUI look like? And that's where we talk about the Firepower Management Center GUI. The last thing I'm going to talk about is domain awareness. A lot of people today are asking about multi-tenancy, and I want to make sure that I do hit that. With the Firepower, you can break these out into a multi-tenancy environment, or you can actually segment this based upon organization or department. It really just comes down to how your organization wants to split this all up. So domain awareness allows us to kind of split the configuration up into multiple different pieces. So we can have different departments, manage this side of the house, so on and so forth. The last thing that I want to show you that I hope you're excited about is I'm going to actually get inside of the Firepower GUI, the FMC, and show you just the different tabs and what are our different options. Where do we configure policy? Where do we manage and maintain the devices, so on and so forth. Okay. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in here. All right, so examining firewall and IPS technologies. First thing is the firewalling technology. Folks, this is super simple. A firewall, at the end of the day, what it's doing is it's checking traffic going in and out of this environment. All traffic entering or leaving a protected network has to pass through this firewall. What is that firewall doing for us, though? It's running through a set of basic match set statements. Those match set statements can be layer 3, layer 4 information, like IP address information or TCP UDP information, but it can also go all the way up to our application layer. If you're not familiar with the Open Systems Interconnection Model, the 7 layers of the OSI, go ahead and Google that up. The application layer is our top layer, where basically all of our application processing happens. So the 3 basic firewall types are the stateless packet filtering, stateful packet filtering, and application layer packet filtering. And again, this is a bunch of match set statements that are very, very basic in nature. Firewalls typically support various routing technologies. Absolutely, they do. We support, OSPF, EIGRP, BGP. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. Now, what I want to do is I want to drill down into the stateless, stateful, and application layer packet filters. So a stateless packet filter, excuse me, as you can see here, all it's really doing is, again, a very basic match set statement. And when I say match set statement, I speak from like a programming perspective, because what we're doing is we're simply putting a match statement and then telling it what to do, permit or deny. That's the set statement. So in this scenario, what they're doing is they're permitting TCP, right, from one host over to another host by simply using this ACL statement. It's saying if it's coming from this host using port 80 and it's going to this host and it's using a port greater than 1023 over here, then go ahead and permit that traffic. Again, very basic match set statement. Now, with that being said, that's all it's doing is it's just watching it to match and set this stuff. Stateful packet filters, on the other hand, what they're going to do is they're going to register a little bit more information instead of just doing the doi to doi, right, from port to port, like, oh, here we go, cool story, right? Instead of just moving the traffic like a conveyor line, now I'm going to look at that traffic. I'm going to start inspecting it. I'm going to start using stateful packet inspection. And what it's going to allow us to do is watch things like connection status. Very, very important. Sometimes, like for instance, as just a side note here, sometimes, in threat actors, what they'll do is they'll take advantage of open idle connections and just hijack those open idle connections, right? So what's really important for us, the reason why we created this stateful packet filtering technology, is to close those, right? I want to close those sessions. I want to make sure that when I see a term, right, or a fin, I terminate that session. Very, very important. So it's not just a basic match set statement at this point. We are actually registering, remembering information about the connections that we're seeing go across the firewall. Now, another thing that we can do here is application layer packet filtering. I like this. This is really, really neat because what we're doing is, and also I love this, on the right-hand side, folks, this is that open systems interconnection model. If you have not seen it, I suggest just a quick Google. Very, very cool stuff. It teaches us how traffic flows from the application, like let's say our web browser, out our workstation through the network to the server, right? So it defines kind of those steps, that process. And so here at the application layer, this is our highest layer, right? This is where our applications actually live, right? When we say SQL, it lives right there, right? Or when we talk IIS, that's where web and HTTP and HTTPS live, right there at the application layer. So what it's doing is not only can we combine stateless and stateful packet filters looking at the network and transport layer, we can also insert application awareness. Like for instance, watch for an HTTP GET message, which means, hey, yeah, go grab me a web page like index.html, right? So again, we're kind of, what we've been doing for years is we've kind of been like stacking these on top of each other, right? To get a nice cohesive firewall technology, right? But moving forward, the next-gen firewalls, they're going to be resolving a lot of problems that we've been seeing for a long time. Even with those three really great technologies, we still have things like fragmentation, where it makes it very, very difficult for our firewall to actually identify a full stream. And actually, let me pull out this really expensive whiteboarding utility. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of it. It's really exclusive, very, very expensive. Not a lot of people use it. Okay. Anyways, just wanted to show you here in Paint. What happens a lot of the time is a threat actor, what they'll do is they'll actually do something like this. They'll take, and actually here, let me go back here real quick. So we have a virus. So we have our virus here, right? What ends up happening a lot of the time is we can actually fragment that full frame. And so what happens is with traditional application stateful and stateless packet filtering, what they do is they're just looking at this as the single piece. Okay, that frame number 1, that doesn't look like a virus. Frame number 2, that doesn't look like a virus. Let's check frame number 3. Hey, that doesn't look like a virus. But what happens when it gets to the destination workstation? Right? TCP is going to send that to the transmission control protocol, and it's going to rebuild this virus. Well, you didn't stop anything there, right? So that's one of the things that when we start talking about next-gen firewalls, the application layer and stateful and stateless packet filters, they couldn't do things like this before. So that's one of the features we'll talk about a little bit later. Now, I did mention routing. And as you can see here, the firewall itself can actually act like your edge router. Absolutely no problem. It can pass traffic from your outside to your inside environments. No problem using static routes, RIP, OSPF, or BGP. Absolutely. Yeah, one thing that I'll note is, as a side note, one of my major jobs in life is application-centric infrastructure. So self-assembling fabrics, that kind of stuff, automated fabrics, and absolutely love that technology. The really neat part about it is that we can take one of these firewalls and simply plug it into the fabric, and it's now the entire edge, right? So it's routing, it's firewalling, it's doing intrusion prevention systems, all on that one device. That's absolutely phenomenal. So keep in mind that so far what we're doing is we're just simply talking about the firewalling functions. At this point, stateful and stateless and application layer firewalling, but then also things like routing and NAT, right? But once we get into the intrusion prevention system, what I want you to think of is this. So we're going to go back here, delete that up here. What I want you to think about is, imagine that this is your firewall. That firewall is bringing in traffic here and doing things like stateful packet filtering and routing. Now, when we talk about next-gen firewalls, keep in mind what it's actually doing now is it's saying, okay, I've done all the basic stuff. Let's go ahead and see if we can send it over here to a higher layer processing piece called an intrusion prevention system. Now, the intrusion prevention system is, as my Boston friends say, wicked cool. Because what the intrusion prevention system does is it does that deep packet inspection. And we call that deep packet inspection. And with that deep packet inspection, what's really, really nice is instead of using these really basic, if you're coming from here, going to here using this port, instead of using that, what we can do is we can say, look inside the data. And if you see like, here, I'm just because here's just a basic XML thing, sure. So look inside the body, look inside the data, drill down even deeper, not just into the header information, but into the actual data that's being sent. Let's look at that data and let's look at it from a more granular perspective. These deep packet inspection rules, these are what you guys would be calling your SNORT rules. These are deep packet inspection rules that can identify data sets and data streams inside the actual data that indicate some sort of compromise or intrusion. So if we go back here to the slideshow, the biggest thing here is, and first and foremost, I do want to mention that if you drop packets in the firewall, it's not going to go to the SNORT engine. I know you're sitting there thinking, well, duh, duh. Some people do ask, right? Now I can take like denied traffic in the firewall and send that to some sort of like syslogging utility, but we're not really going to process the traffic anymore. If the traffic is accepted through the firewall, we can create what are called ACLs. And I know you folks probably, that's synonymous with access control lists. Here, they're actually called ACPs, access control policies. We say that if this traffic was permitted through the firewall, allow it, here we go, allow it to be inspected by the SNORT engine. Okay. And again, newer IPSs allow for that deep packet inspection. Look at this protocol reassembly. I was just mentioning that. State tracking, session rebuilding, application layer inspection, like in the actual data. Very, very cool stuff. Earlier versions of these intrusion prevention systems were susceptible to some invasion attacks, like that fragmentation attack that I was showing you earlier, where it says virus and they cut it up, right? Newer intrusion prevention systems can get around that. They can actually rebuild the information. Now, the next gen firewalls or intrusion prevention systems do this deep packet inspection all the way up to layer 7. We already mentioned that. The next gen devices include additional features. This is the stuff that I really want to get into right here, folks. So anomaly detection. There's actually 2 ways that we can do that. We can do that on the firewall side. We can also do that with a Firepower agent on the workstation side. Very awesome. Protocol matching to match against threats. Absolutely. We can take a protocol and we can identify, what exactly in this specific attack is the actual issue. What's the actual anomaly? We can alert about suspicious behavior, traffic analysis, malware detection, because we can look inside. Since we can do deep packet inspection, we can look at things like attachments and identify if that attachment is an infection before it even hits the workstation. Beautiful. Security intelligence. This is really neat. So we have things like, in security intelligence, we have things like URL filtering, IP filtering, DNS filtering. That's what security intelligence is looking at like globalized blacklists, checking to verify that the traffic that we're seeing is not coming from a malicious like command and control address that we've seen in the past. The other stuff is pretty simple. Application filtering, URL filtering. We can also set up user-based authentication with role-based access control. Hey, we can even integrate this into identity services, into your ICE identity service engine to give us even a higher level of control over, okay, now they've got to log in, right, to start using these applications. And once they use these applications, now we can filter and do data packet inspection. So this can get very, very robust, very, very quickly. Dynamic routing protocols, NATs, and VPN technologies. These are all part of the next gen firewall features. Now, moving forward into the threat defense features and components. This is where we shift gears. We're going to start talking about the FMC. That was just a quick primer on what's the difference between a firewall and a next gen firewall. Now we're going to start talking about the actual Firepower IPS 200 and the FMC. So what we have here is the Firepower Threat Defense Portfolio. What is it doing for us? We've got threat and visibility in innovations. So what we're doing here, folks, is we are constantly in the background, whether you see us or not. Talos, right? Thank you, Talos. They are constantly in the background identifying what we call indicators of compromise, or basically those anomalies, right, that we see. 0 day is going to be the big one. I have obviously like identified worms like Sasser and I Love You and all that jazz. We've already identified that stuff, but we're always looking for brand new indicators of compromise. And by the way, because we support what's called NBAR, network-based application recognition, on the firewall side and on the SNORT side, we can absolutely support custom and open source applications. I can actually create at my company, and we've been able to do this for years, by the way, with IP NBAR, but with next-gen firewalling, it just makes it way more impressive. With network-based application recognition, we can create our own customized applications and then insert that knowledge into our NBAR database. Very cool stuff. What I mean by NBAR database is if you've ever created an ACL and you know how you put like port 80 at the end, and then it says www when you do a show, that's because NBAR converted the port number to a name. That's exactly what network-based application recognition, the application does. So we have a high level of visibility into not just our standard protocols, but customized applications. Flexible deployment. Hey, by the way, you can have this inside or outside of your network. You can have it physical or you can have it virtual. I work a lot with the virtual ones, with the virtual firepower on VMware in ACI. So absolutely. And then software convergence. This is where we start talking about the FXOS, right? The firepower operating system. What we've done is we've combined the management of our SNORT engine and the management of our firewall into one FXOS operating system that allows us to control both sides under one piece, the FMC, the Firepower Management Center. In the beginning, you know, I got my my CCSP. Stupid side note, I got my CCSP, I think in like 2006, 2007. And back then you had like an ASA 5500. If you wanted intrusion prevention, it was a completely separate module and you had to connect to it completely differently than your firewall, right? So those were actually two separate pieces. What is that? Holy smokes, 15 years ago? Sorry, time flies. Yeah, 15 years ago, they were two separate pieces. They were managed completely separately. Now what we've done is we've converged that management into the FMC, the Firepower Management Center. Now, moving forward here, threat defense and visibility. So these are all the really cool things that Firepower can do for you. And I get really excited about this stuff because this really shows you all of its capabilities. The first thing up here in the top left is IP, URL, and DNS protection. We actually maintain a database of IP, URL, and DNS lists that have been found to be malicious, right? So for instance, we do look at the certificate revocation list with certificates, and we look at DNS blacklists, we look at URL blacklists. By the way, that's all that can be maintained by Cisco, but you can also add your own, right? You find one you don't like people going to that URL, that IP, or that DNS domain. Hey, you can go ahead and create an ACL or an access control policy inside of security intelligence that says, hey, don't allow anybody to and from this specific URL. Beautiful, right? We also have Open App ID. This is kind of like the NBAR of today. So we call Open App ID. It's just, I guess you would say, a genetic evolution of NBAR. It's essentially the same thing, but it's allowing us to get even more detailed inside the application itself. Very, very cool stuff. The intrusion prevention system is SNORT, by the way. And yes, as a side note, the SNORT guys still take care of the SNORT engine. Cisco guys still take care of the firewall stuff, right? Never shall the twain meet. They are actually two separate entities working on the same box. But what that means for you folks is that you have a worldwide team dedicated to ensuring that those app IDs, those indicators of compromise, right? All of those are up to date as much as we can. One of the things that I saw when I was, studying years and years ago that I found is essentially the same thing today. Is we used to have this 3 week to 3 month, depending on your visibility, of how long it would take us to identify a threat or a compromise. Now we're talking about 1 week to 1 day, right? Even a day or to an hour. That's how fast we're getting now with these SNORT rules. Now, where do these SNORT rules actually come from? They actually come from over here. There's two guys over here, right? There's Talos, and then there's Threat Grid. threat grid is what allows us to say, okay, hey, Cisco, I'm seeing something that my Firepower IPS doesn't know what it is, right? I don't know what it is. Can you send that up to Cisco and send it to Talos and send it to threat grid to see if they can explode that inside of a sandbox and see if it's actually malicious, right? So not only are they constantly looking, but what a lot of people don't realize is your Firepower is constantly sending stuff that says, I'm not sure about this one. Go send it up to threat grid, right? So not only is Talos and threat grid helping us out, but you're helping yourself, right? You're sending that data up to Talos and threat grid and making sure that we stay up to date. And then another thing that's really, really cool is we can actually identify files, file protection. Now, what I mean by that is, the biggest example is, right, salary spreadsheet, right? You don't want everybody seeing the salary spreadsheet, right? No. So what you can do is you can actually identify that file's name inside of your next-gen firewall, and it will disallow it because it can do deep packet inspection. It can see that that file is attached coming from an inside port to an outside port, and it can deny it, right? So we can get very, very granular. We can even get down to directories, right? A full directory of just don't allow that out. Don't allow anybody to send that. Very, very cool stuff. But at the end of the day, that's just a small piece. The other thing is obviously it can do local malware checks. We do have a Firepower agent that we can put on our workstations and our servers that can actually identify traffic leaving. And so if it's part of that file protection list, or it's an obvious infection, we can actually decline it from leaving that workstation before it even hits the switch, right? So the agent is a very cool thing. It acts like your kind of, I wouldn't say your full malware protection, but your network malware protection. Very, very cool stuff there. Now, as I mentioned, folks, we do have a flexible deployment. We have our multi-domain management. This is really important. As you can see here, you have your security operations centers operators. What we can do is if you're in a multi-tenant environment, you folks are managing multiple tenants. This is customer 1, 2, and 3. I can absolutely cut this FMC into 3 parts. They're all going to have the same pieces, but they're going to have their own different configurations, right? Another thing that is really cool is SSL decryption. Ooh. A lot of people ask me about this, right? With SSL decryption, no, we don't encrypt all SSL traffic. No, we do not have that power right now. That would be insane, right? To have to decrypt every SSL. No, the way that this works, folks, and it's a common misnomer. You have to have the certificate, right? I have to have the SSL certificate so that I can use that SSL certificate to encrypt and decrypt, right? So the next gen, or the Firepower IPS, the next gen firewall, has the ability for you to download a certificate from a local or remote server and use that to decrypt SSL traffic so that you can inspect it. I think that's really neat. But the kind of the gotcha here is you got to make sure that you have your SSL certificate. We do have a captive portal. This is nice for if you do have multi-tenant environments, you can allow your customers to actually get in and manage, or at least monitor, their firewalls. And I've worked in a lot of different capacities in technology. One of them was managed service platform. And that's one thing that we used to do at our Las Vegas colo, is we would allow them, and yeah, I know, boo hiss, we used FortiGates. I know, FortiGates. But we used to use FortiGates, and we would manage them ourselves globally from our NOC, from our SOC. But we would also allow them to get in, and if they needed to review, like, let's say there was a hiccup in the network, was it the firewall? Was it right? Was it a load balancer? What was the problem? They can get in there and they can manage their own FMCs. And then, as I mentioned earlier, ICE, it's got integration. So if you want to integrate this into the identity services engines, tying an application to a username and password, go for it. Absolutely groovy. Let's do it. Now, with that being said, access control features. How can we control access here with the FMC? So we have, first of all, application aware stateful packet filtering. Okay, that's awesome. We also have inline user-based authentication for ICE. That's adding another layer on top of it. Then this detailed system and session accounting, that right there, that's your intrusion prevention system. So what we're doing is, again, just like in the past, we're kind of layering approaches on top of each other to make this a smooth inline transition from an outside interface to an inside interface. Now, threat defense automation, we do have an analytics, remediation, and operations. Long story short here, and this isn't a programming class, but we have the ability for things like Firepower to talk to other appliances, like my APIC and ACI, or my tetration engine for tetration and analytics and real-time application dependencies. One example of this, folks, is if Firepower sees a workstation over here that has an indicator of compromise, it can tell the APIC to go create an endpoint group and isolate that workstation. Right, it integrates it and it automates all of that, right? So that workstation will actually be isolated, so it can't actually communicate with any other internal devices, which is very, very cool. And that's all automated. That's all done on its own, right? And I got to say that the integration for that is very, very simple. But again, not an integration course, right? Not a programming course. What we want to talk about here is the FMC, the Firepower Management Center basics. There's two large things that you're going to do here. The first one is bring in the devices. The second one is policy management. The FMC, the Firepower Management Center, can be physical or virtual. This can be a physical box or a virtual box living here on your environment. What it's doing is it's connecting to your LAN and or to the management interfaces, however you want to do this. And it is bringing in the administration of these devices, what we call the FTDs, the Firepower Threat Defense Device, the FTD, the Threat Defense Device. So these are the actual firewalls, right? You could think of the administration as extracted and centralized. Excuse me. By the way, you can manage these one by one, but you do lose some functionality. I don't have enough time to talk about that, but you do lose some functionality. So our supported devices that we can pull in here. Hey, how's about a Cisco ASA with the Firepower Threat Defense module in it? Okay. How's about the Firepower 800 or 8000, I'm sorry, 8000, 7000 series? Okay. I'm also seeing the 2100 series and 9300 series. That's a big one, the 9300 series. So the FMC, the Firepower Management Center, can manage each one of these devices. And with that being said, yes, there's tons of different series inside here and here. So it's not just 3 devices, I promise. Now, the way that we're going to communicate here, this is very important. The FMC is what sends configuration. The device does not poll. This device does, and it says it right here. Managed devices do not poll the FMC for policy configuration. This is a one-way push from a northbound to a southbound API from the FMC down to the FTD, Firepower Threat Defense Device. Now, what the FTD will do is send syslog, events, data discovery, application discovery, device statistics. It will send all of this information up to your FMC. By the way, that's another feature that I didn't even mention yet, is the Firepower has the ability to actually go learn all of the workstations dynamically on your internal network and you can manage those devices. I'm talking hosts or machines, right? So it can actually push that information, that management information, up to the FMC. Very cool stuff there. Now, how do we get access to it? HTTPS, right? We say use Mozilla or Chrome. Internet Explorer not recommended. I don't want to get into that. If you're in the know, you know. You can also restrict access using what's called role-based access control or role-based authentication control. Username and password-based authentication, but also role-based, where you could say what they can and can't do. And you can also have multiple admins logged in at any one point in time. Absolutely. This isn't a one-trick pony. Now, our management options here. So these are going to be, honestly, these two are going to be the most common. You have your FDM, which I don't use a lot, actually. The FDM is actually a localized administration tool, but the FMC is that centralized administration tool. This is going to reach out to all your FTDs and pull them in and push a globalized, centralized, consistent security configuration down to each one of your devices. Now, the FMC itself, that's usually used to manage like one site or I'm sorry, not one site, one organization. If you have multiple organizations, you can use what's called the Cloud Defense Orchestrator. And this is going to be for multiple deployments or organizations. This is kind of like your vCloud director, UCS director, so on and so forth. This is your globalized orchestrator. Now, when we're ready to go log in, it does look a little different than this today, but we'll get to that. Yeah, you're going to go ahead and first run through a setup script on the FMC and on the FMC's device. And actually, when you're running through creating it as a virtual machine, you already insert your management info, your management IP info. So you just pop that management IP in here to a web browser and say HTTPS and go. Once we get in, this is what I'm going to be showing you folks. I'm going to be showing you like our dashboards, analytics, policies, devices, objects, right? I'm going to be showing you folks this. So we'll just wait until we get there. Domain awareness is where we can subdivide this configuration into about 50 subdomains, or what I would consider 50 tenants per FTD, or I'm sorry, FMC instance. Right, so 50 per FMC instance. When you get into the cloud orchestrator, it's obviously much higher because it's used for multi-tenancy and orchestration. But just from the FMC, yeah, a single domain can hold 50 subdomains. And when we say subdomains, folks, that could be different customers. That could be different organizations in your, or departments in your organization. Or that could be different regions, right? It really just comes down to how you want to slice and splice it. There's no real recommendation there. It's just how do you want to use it? And so here, each one of these domains is going to generate their own policies, right? So they're going to have their own policies, but they're also going to generate their own domain-specific events and syslog and all of that stuff. So as I mentioned, managed security service providers, MSPs, that's what I've done this the most on. In application-centric infrastructure, I use that a lot. You have 3 domain levels, and this just basically means policy inheritance, honestly. If you have a single domain level, everybody's going to receive the same configuration. You're just going to have one domain, and that's it, right? 2 domain level, that's where I have a root domain and then a subdomain, right? That's where I just say, okay, so this is my organization, and then here are my different departments. A 3 domain level is where you have a root, and then you might have regional ID, and then a 3rd layer for maybe department per region. As just an example, it's just a folder directory, folks. That's all it is. And then the last thing here is the domain considerations. Whenever you want to create a new one, a new domain, we're going to click on System up at the top right-hand corner. We're going to click on Domains. You can add, remove, and modify, add, delete, and modify domains there. You can move devices between domains. Now, this is really important because when you're moving stuff from domain to domain, we have global policies that can affect traffic. So there are some various concerns here when moving devices. Not something that we do on like a traditional basis day to day, something more of like, oops, I put it in the wrong domain, right? I was logged into the wrong domain. I added the device to the wrong one. That's normally during setup, right? So you're not going to be doing that so much from day to day. You can also move data, or in other words, network maps and events between the domains. Very cool. All right, now, let me go back here. So the next thing is, I just want to give you a quick demo here of the Firepower Management Console. Let me go ahead and bring this up here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to open it up for questions. So, okay. So actually, let me exit out of here real quick. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to go to Chrome and I'm going to pop in the IP address of my FMC. It's already there. Going to go ahead and log in. So yes, this is what the FMC looks like now. And I got to see what version they're on, but that's neither here nor there. When we get logged in here, folks, the first thing it does, give me 1 second here. The first thing it does is it pops you into the system dashboard. Now, this system dashboard has a ton of stuff. One of the biggest things is we have things called top talkers, like top server, top operating system, and then like top applications. This is all NetFlow and NBAR and all that stuff that you folks have set up in the past manually. This is all already set up for you on the FTDs. These are the actual Firepower devices reporting back to the FMC, this management console. It's reporting back all of the data that it's seeing. Very, very cool. I mean, as soon as you log in, oh, wow. Okay. It looks like people are using Google and Chrome. Okay. Awesome. What about some risks? Oh, man. Looks like we do have some risks already, right? Excuse me. And so I'm not going to go through every single one of these, right? But you can actually add more widgets too, based upon devices, policy, right? Application, very cool stuff. I don't have time to walk you through everything, but very, very cool. Now on the overview tab, this is all about reporting, right? You can see you got your dashboard, management, that's the management of the system of the FMC, and then reporting. All of that stuff is fantastic information to pull down for reports. We used to do quarterly reports, right, for our organization. That was cool. Under the analysis tab, holy smokes, there's a lot of stuff here. But what I want you to note here is the analysis tab is looking at really, like, for instance, it can reach out and, like I said, it can learn the workstations on your network. But guess what? It can also learn the applications, right? So we can actually look at what files are we seeing, what applications, what network maps. Like, for instance, these are the subnets, right? So I can see what subnets are available on my network. I can see the hosts. I can see what indicator of compromises are currently active right now. Reporting is cool, but it gives you pie charts and graphs. This gives you the detailed information. Now, policies. This is where we're going to create things like our application control policies. Hold on a moment. There we go. Our access control policies. These are like your firewall policies. And the firewall policies that tell us that you're allowed to go to intrusion. These are the intrusion prevention system SNORT rules. You can enable malware and file protection. We have this thing called AMP, the Advanced Malware Protection Management Suite inside here. This is actually constantly talking back and forth to Talos, you know, to update those security signatures for malware and file. DNS is another big one. Identity services for ICE, SSL. This is if you want to download, well, technically it's upload a certificate to the FMC so that you can decrypt SSL traffic. And then there is this thing called a pre-filter. This is kind of neat. Let's say that there's traffic that you do not want to ever hit the intrusion prevention system. You want it to be lickety split really quick, right? Really fast, right? We do have the ability to create what's called a pre-filter and filter out the things like voice and video traffic from a secure, trusted source. So we can pop that into a pre-filter. There's other stuff here like network discovery, application detection, and correlations. The network discovery, like I said, you can create a policy that says, go search the 10.1 network for workstations. Go tell me what applications are available on this 192 subnet. The other things, devices. What you'll notice is, look at this, NAT, VPN, QoS. If I go here to device management, this is actually going to show me all of the devices that are currently learned by my FMC. So I've actually got 3 firewalls learned, and absolutely we can drill down into these bad boys, right? So I can see what interfaces we've got. I've got my routing configuration over here, right? And it's a little slow. DCloud's having a little bit of an issue today, but look at, I can configure everything right here, right? So this is drilling down into the devices. So with that, you can configure things like globalized NAT settings, site-to-site remote access, VPN settings, and quality of service settings. We also have objects. Now, this is something that came to us a long, long time ago, where you can actually name a subnet, for instance, right? So I'll create a network object that we'll call it home, right? If we're working like with a 2100 series here or an 1100 series here on my desk, right? So I have an 1120 series Firepower, right? And yeah, I have the ability to drill down into these objects and say that this interface is tied to an object named home, which is my subnet. I can then use ACLs to tie that name. Instead of typing subnets, I can use that object in the dropdown and say, oh, this is for home going outside. Instead of you having to type IP addresses and all that, you can give it a name by creating an object. We can do that with the applications, host names, or I'm sorry, subnets, tons of different options there. Advanced malware protection. This does require licensing, but what it does is it reaches out and updates your SNORT rules for you. Bada bing, bada boom. And then security intelligence. This is what's going to tell us about things like, okay, I saw some sort of indicator of compromise, and here's the detailed information on it. Obviously, this is a test environment, so I don't see that. But with that being said, the last thing we have really here is keep in mind that whenever you make a change, you must deploy in that one way, one direction configuration push. And so with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for giving me your time. I'm going to go ahead and open this up to questions if you folks have any. Otherwise, that concludes the lecture and demo portion of our tech talk.
You mentioned about that FMC.
Yes.
Okay, it can also tells you about top talker, top application.
Oh yeah.
It's taking up a lot of the bandwidth. And
yeah, absolutely. And actually, if you look at your screen, it's actually right here, top web applications. So we're seeing that people are like going to Google a lot more than like Dropbox or like Google Play or even Facebook. You can actually drill down. You can go top web applications by user. So I can actually see who's using Google the most.
Okay.
Yep.
I do have another question.
Sure.
I want to go back where you was saying about fragmentations and when a virus come in and it breaks it up.
Yep.
And TCP would take it and send it anyway because it's not recognizing it. So
Right.
it would take an ISP to be able to recognize that that virus had been fragmented.
No, what happens actually is the Firepower threat defense device has this thing called defragmentation on it. And by the way, it's enabled by default on all your FTDs. And so what it does is, because it can do deep packet inspection, it can see the sequence and acknowledgement numbers and rebuild the sequence and acknowledgement like TCP segments into that full frame, then send it to the intrusion prevention system. So this is all being done by the FTD, the Firepower Threat Defense Device, the actual firewall itself.
Okay. That is what I was missing in my notes. So okay.
Right on.
Indeed.
And again, you don't have to have like licensing or anything like that. It's on by default.
Okay.
Anything else, Jacqueline?
Not at the moment.
Okay.
Thank you for taking my questions.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Okay. John is asking a really good question here. And no, John, I did not mention, well, I mentioned NetFlow and NBAR, but those are supported right out of the box. You don't set anything up, dude. I love it. Right? It's already ready already. And can multiple FMCs be configured in a cluster? Absolutely. With the physical ones, absolutely. Well, actually, yeah, with the virtual ones too. Yeah, we can absolutely. And I see that actually, I see that in ACI a lot, because in application-centric infrastructure deployments, there could be like hundreds of firepower devices being set down and dropped down. So yeah, we usually cluster those FMCs together. Good questions.